We are live. Facebook is having an issue or two. Let me work that out. All right. How's it going, YouTube? You guys are first in. Outstanding. I won't be here tomorrow morning. I have a minor medical procedure that I have to do, but I'll be here the next day. All right. Letting people pile in a little bit. All right. Okay, let's go ahead and start getting into it. All right, so got the questions from yesterday, and actually, this is like a pretty static question that comes up over and over again. This part of our business is the part. Trying to think of the best way to say it. This is the part of our business where we encounter the most talkers, right? And so when you're building out generational wealth, you definitely want to talk less and do more. And it's essentially the one place where a lot of people talk and don't do very much at all. Thank you. You're awesome. And don't do very much at all. And the sad truth of the situation is that people get intimidated by the concept of creating generational wealth, and that's probably why they operate that way with it. And yet, it's literally the easiest thing that we do, right? Much harder to do immigration, much harder to do construction and all of that stuff. Much harder to do all of those things versus build a generational wealth foundation. So, why is it so easy to build generational wealth? The reason why it's so easy to build generational wealth is because wealth compounds, right? So, wealth compounds, and as it compounds, it grows without your help. That's why it's ridiculously easy to do. Now, keeping it's a completely different thing, right? Keeping it requires that you've planned out education for your descendants, and that you make sure that everybody who's going to benefit from the generational wealth that you've created knows how to handle it. So that's how keeping it works. But making it is stupid easy. So why don't more people do it? Because a lot of people are more talk than action, right? A lot of people have, I don't know if it's ego, I don't know what it is, but there's this fear of failure where they don't want to even try because they might fail, right? And see it kind of as a waste. Mind you, during this time, and this goes for me too. I used to do this all the time, especially when I was young. You're afraid to invest something. You're afraid to get something going because it might fail, and then it's like a waste of time. And then meanwhile, in my example, meanwhile, you're buying 5 pairs of Jordans. You can only wear one pair of sneakers at a time, right? So in your daily life, you're wasteful, and you're throwing, things away. And yet, when it comes to making a move that can benefit your family for generations, there's this fear of failure and all these excuses. And like I said, I was there myself, right? So I've been there. I've been the one making the excuses and talking the crap. But it is ridiculously easy, right? Money likes to compound. That's what it does. Now, most of you, your money is compounding away from you, right? So if you have a car note and you're paying on your car, the interest that you pay on that car note is compound, right? It's compounding interest, but it's compounding away from you, right? If you have a mortgage, the interest you're paying on your mortgage, it's compounding, but it's compounding away from you, right? So what you want is you want to get assets that are going to compound for you. Now, big distinction. Generational wealth has nothing to do with your personal wealth plan. That's another way to screw it up, right? Generational wealth is guaranteed if you have a generational wealth plan. You cannot guarantee when you'll hit a certain number, but you can guarantee that your money will compound and that there'll be money for the next generation, right? You can guarantee that. You can, like I said, you can't guarantee a specific number or even a specific time. So those are the unknown factors, right? But if you want to see like a master of compounding, go study like a Warren Buffett. Like that's how he built Berkshire Hathaway. And he quite frequently talks about not being a trading genius, right? That he just holds, securities and waits, and that's all it is, right? So your generational wealth plan is all about getting a security that's going to compound and leaving it there for the next generation. It does not benefit you. It's not going to help you. Your personal wealth plan has to be a separate plan. All right. The people who their generational wealth plan is they're going to get rich and then leave it to their kids, that's like a 90% chance of failure. All right. So they're actually doing their children a disservice, right? Because it doesn't matter how much money you start with. That's why it's so stupid easy and it's so ridiculous that more people don't do it, right? You could literally start with $100. It'll take forever to get to a significant amount of money, but you could literally start with $100 and it could compound year after year after year, and if you're starting with something as small as $100, 120 years later, you might have, a half a million, right? So what's the function? How does that work? The function is the rate at which it's growing, which would be the interest rate or the ROI in this case, and how long it grows. Those are the two functions. It's even easy for like non-financial people to understand, right? It's just the percentage that you're getting and how long you're getting it, right? And the other function is what we call DRIP. DRIP stands for Dividend Reinvestment Program, right? Your dividend reinvestment program has to be a high percent. Typically, we say 100%, right? Because it's for the next generation. It's not supposed to benefit you at all, right? So we typically say it should be 100%. What does that mean? That means that if you invested, let's say $1,000, and you're getting 10% on the $1,000, the entire 10% has to be reinvested every time you get it. You have to have a 100% DRIP, 100% dividend reinvestment program, right? And so as long as you keep on reinvesting, then that's how the compounding works, because that return on investment typically stays the same, right? So what's going to end up happening is if you're getting an average of 10%, that average is done by the ups and downs, across the market, across the entire time that you've been investing, right? So that average stays the same. You might get 12 one year, you might get 8 another year, but it's going to average out to 10, right? And so as long as that 10% is being reinvested, the principal keeps going up, which is what you want to happen, right? That's how you compound the money. Whatever the percentage is, there's something that you hear people talk about, like the rule of 72 and blah, 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 blah. That's just a way to figure out how long it takes for the money to double, right? So whatever the percentage is, you can multiply it, by 72, and that'll roughly tell you how long it's going to take for the money to double. So, for example, we had the tax-exempt infrastructure bond here in Kenya, which was last February. It's not open right. Well, that one's not open right now. But it was a beautiful bond because it was a government bond. It was 20 years and it was 18.46%, right? So if you do the math on that, that means that like every 3 years and 3 months, your money doubles, right? If you're doing the reinvestment. So having almost 20%, ROI on a government bond was extraordinary. That's almost double the S&P 500, right? So based on that, families that wanted to set themselves up were able to calculate how much they needed to start with to get where they were going, right? So for example, if a family dropped 10 grand into that, if they had 10 grand available for, an ad hoc investment, they saw a safe investment as a government treasury bond, tax exempt, they dropped 10 grand in there. 3 years and 4 months later, that 10 grand would be 20 grand. But 3 years and 4 months after that, now the 20 grand will be 40 grand. All right. So that's why the higher the interest rate, the easier it is and the faster it is. To lower the interest rate, the slower it is. And it might start going the opposite direction, right? The interest rate has to be higher than the inflation rate. If inflation is higher than the interest that you're getting, then you're losing money, which is why all the money in your savings account is losing money right now. All right, so for money to be working for you while you sleep, that money has to have an interest rate that's higher than inflation. All right, super, super duper easy. Not a hard thing to do. Okay, you can do it anywhere. All right, so you can choose any kind of account, you can do it anywhere. Now, the reason we do it the way we do it is to protect the funds for the future generation. All right. So we do it using offshore trusts. We let the money compound in those offshore trusts. And that's for a couple reasons. Number one, the trust will dictate who is allowed to be the beneficiary of the trust, right? And so part of that is education. Like to maintain status as a trust beneficiary, there's certain financial literacy that those descendants have to go through. There's certain trainings that they might have to take. However you want to set it up, it's completely up to you. But the statistics are that like 75% of generational wealth folks that have no education lose it all in the first generation, and then another 50% of the ones who don't lose. So of the 25%, half of them lose it in the second generation. Beyond that, you're pretty much solid. If you made it through those two, you're pretty much good to go, statistically speaking. But the difference between the 75% that fails and the 25% that succeeds is literacy, financial literacy. So the money is literally the easy part, right? It's that it doesn't help you. Again, this is a generational wealth plan, but that's literally the easy part. You can throw any amount of money you want and let it compound, and your grandkids will get it, right? The hard part is making sure your grandkids don't blow it. Right. So the trust structure that we use for our clients in particular won't allow the grandkids to blow it, number one. Number two, it makes sure that on the annual meetings that happen every year, that those kids have educational modules that they have to go through to maintain their status. All right. So you want to make sure that and so how do you do that? Like that's another part of why we do things the way that we do it. Because how do you make sure there's education available that you don't know, right? It's tough, right? So in that setup, that's why the trust works really, 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 really well, right? Because like I said, the money is the easy part, but if you don't have the education, the money falls apart. Right. So how do you handle that? Well, you got to give the next generation the education part of the trust setup. And that's also something that the trust solves for you, because your trust, typically, there are people who, do their own thing, but typically we recommend that the trust be a non-grantor trust. What does that mean? That means that the person who created the trust has nothing to do with it. Right. So if the person who created the trust has nothing to do with it, who's running the trust? A law firm, right? Typically a law firm, a trust company, which typically has a bunch of lawyers in it. If not, it's completely a law firm, right? So you write the document that governs the entire trust, like the constitution of the trust, the laws of the trust. The law firm can only do what's written in that document, right? It's called a trust deed. Once you write that document out, the lawyers can only do what's written in that document. But because you're not running it, it changes your tax implications in most countries, right? So in the United States, you can just go to irs.gov, go to a little search bar on the government website and type in there non-grantor trust. And you'll see all the tax filings that you don't have to do according to the government themselves if the trust is non-grantor. Right. So you only have to do a tax filing if there's a distribution to a U.S. citizen. Right. Or a U.S. asset is placed in the trust, which, most of our people would never do. Right. So that's how you make sure that that generation gets the education that you don't even know to give, because the law firm is the one in charge of educating them, right? And they have to. It's part of the trust. So if they don't do it, then they're violating the trust, and they can actually be taken to court, and pay some pretty hefty penalties and some censors and fines from the government for not following the trustee. So that's how you do it. That's why we use the system we use. But people can just put money away in a place or in a vehicle that's going to compound. So is that a high interest savings account? Maybe. If the high yield is higher than inflation, maybe, right? Is that a stock? Maybe. If the stock is giving dividends that are higher than inflation, then maybe, right? So yes, you can do it any way you want to do it. You can do it at home. You can, call a broker. You can go to your bank, and there'll be somebody in the bank that they'll refer you to, that can help you out with it. But the way we do it is simply for safety reasons. Because the way we do it, once it's the offshore non-grantor trust that's doing it, then what ends up happening is nothing in your life affects it at all. So that means if you get a divorce, nobody can get half of it. If you're on child support, nobody can take it for the child support. If you get in an accident, right, just a regular old auto accident, and you're sued and you lose, they can't take it, right? So that's the whole point of the way that we do it. But the way that we do it is absolutely not the only way to do it. Okay, you can absolutely do it, at home, with an Acorn account. You know what I mean? It's just not protected. You know, I'm 40, broke, can't find a job. I tell you what, it's one of those where there's a will, there's a way situations, my man. Um, I've been homeless. I've been broke. I've not had jobs. Now I've built a bunch of companies overseas and all of that. When I decided that I wanted family to have generational wealth, which again has nothing to do with personal wealth. I picked up cans, bro. You know what I mean? I picked up cans. I used to go, there's this place where I come from called Penn Street. Penn Street's where all the bars are at. And there's alleyways behind the bars. I used to go on the weekends, go through the alleyways, dig the freaking nasty bear cans out of the trash, out of the dumpsters, crush the cans, put them in a see-through bag, and take them to the recycling plant every Monday. Every weekend, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, I'm in there crushing nasty cans. You know what I mean? Bring them to the recycling plant, get a couple $100, and put $50 away, for my kids' future. So, it depends on how badly you want it. Yeah, man. Right. So, the point is that it sets up the next generation, right? Even in my lowest time, like the time I was just describing, I never thought I was going to get out of that. Like when you're at rock bottom, you figure like, all right, this is fucking it, like whatever. And but I knew that if I had kids and all of that, I never wanted them to ever be in that situation. So it was like, F it. If this is where I'm at, this is where I'm at. But I'm going to make sure that my kids are never in this position, period. So I'm going to do whatever I know I can do something to make some little money. I know that little money isn't necessarily going to help me, but I understand compounding. Like even then I understood what compounding was. So because I understood what compounding was, it was like, all right, I can put $50 away and let this thing compound. And in 20 years, my kids are going to be in a way better situation than me. Right. Like, and that's the end of it. So I was able to focus in that direction. And then I bounced back, you know what I mean? And, opened up businesses, started going. And you don't need to do an LLC to open a business, right? If you're broke, like I was way back when, you can start your business as a sole proprietor. Who cares, right? The difference between a sole proprietor and an LLC is the liability. Sole proprietors have unlimited liability. I'm broke. You want to sue me? You can't get blood out of a stone. Who cares? I'll take all the liability, right? So it's a matter of excuses, right? People will make excuses all the time to not do what they're supposed to do, right? If you're broke and you got no assets, who cares about liability? What are they going to take from you? Just go do a sole proprietorship. It doesn't matter at that point. You're at rock bottom, right? The only way you can go is up. So that's the mindset that has to be built, is get past the excuses, go break your back and make it happen. That's it. And then when you come out the other side, you know, and people will act like you just made it overnight and not realize that you spent, 5 years homeless, and you know what I mean, and didn't eat every day, breaking your back to make a business work. Then you can get an LLC going. When you got shit to lose, when you got money and you got assets to lose, then you set up the LLC. So you have your limited liability protection and people can't take what you finally built. You know what I mean? But you don't got to start that way. If you're broke, who cares if somebody sues you if you're broke? What are they going to take from you? Right? So you don't need to go pay money to get into business. You're a sole proprietor. You just go get into business. Just go make something happen. But the longer you have excuses, the longer you stay in that position. And that was me. Like, don't get it twisted. I had the excuses too, right? So that was me. But the longer you have the excuses, the longer you will stay in your position. Oh, uh, should I sign myself to Fidelity? If Fidelity's offering you something, I mean, just do whatever it is that's going to make you something. I did all kinds of dumb shit. there was a there was a company called Vector. They sold knives. I don't even remember the name of the damn knives, but they sold these knives. And they were ridiculous. Like, they would try to get you to like sell your old grandmother and all that shit. Um, there was a company called Kirby. They sold vacuum cleaners. And same type of shit. Same type of shit. They didn't give you any real sales training, and then they make you make a list of like your closest friends and family that you might be able to guilt into like giving you a sale. And then that was that. And I think with the Vector one, they wanted you to like buy the knives yourself. So so you go to like this job interview and you have to pay for the job essentially. It was ridiculous. But there was all kinds of stupid shit that I did to get by when I had nothing. You know what I mean? It is what it is. But it definitely puts you in a position where you don't want to do that. Yeah, there you go, Walter. You know what I'm talking about. Cutco knives. That's right. And so the company was called Vector. You're absolutely correct, Walter. But it was a Cutco knife thing. And it wasn't cheap. I feel like it was like $200 for the knife set. It was nuts. So yeah, all kinds of foolishness. Trying to think what else. There was more than just that. There was the Cutco thing, which was through Vector. There was the Kirby vacuums, Encyclopedia Britannica, if you're old enough to remember that. He went around selling the encyclopedia, and you would sell it like one volume at a time. So the whole thing was like $1,000, and this is like back in the day. So like today, that would be like, I don't know, maybe $5,000 or $10,000. And then you would try to convince people to like buy like A, right? And it wasn't even A, because the way the old Encyclopedia Britannica worked was it would be like Adam to Aardvark. You know what I mean? Like it would be a range. It wouldn't just be like, well, this is A, and you got every word that was under A. So you had to buy this entire set of these giant books, and you would get these people to like sign up, and they would buy one book a month, or you know what I mean? Ridiculous business models. But it's a map. But it taught me what bad business was versus good business. So there's that. It taught me what bad salesmanship, like what manipulation was versus real salesmanship. So there's that. So there was a lot that I learned going through those things. Now, I didn't have to learn anything. If I chose not to open my mind to learning and to understanding what was going on and analyzing what was going on, I wouldn't learn shit. I would have just went through that experience and learned nothing. right? So there's that. You got to have the mindset to be willing to assess things and look at how these things are working out, and seeing, behind the curtain and figuring out what's going on, right? That's super important as well. And then you have to put yourself in a position to like kind of work with the opposite also, right? I had even, been sent to one of those recruiting meetings for Amway, you know what I mean, and all of that nonsense, right? So there's all kinds of stuff that you can be exposed to that will show you exactly what you don't want. And there's typically there's a kernel of something in everything. There's typically something you can pull away from everything, and learn a little something from that. But the biggest thing that I learned from those weird, manipulative, like horrible sales jobs, is how to identify that, right? And how to make sure that that's not on my team, how to make sure, and grow in a different direction. And for me, since most of those, you know, jobs, focus on, you wanting to get something out of it and them not really delivering that to you, it's really easy to be like, all right, I think this sucks, but if this sucks, it stands to reason that perhaps the opposite should be just that, the opposite of sucks, right? And so what you then start realizing is that what real sales should be about is, it should be about helping somebody make a decision to get what they want. That's what it should be about, right? And so that's what then catapults you into, like a specialist regime, right? So if you're focusing on business from that position, you'll end up becoming a specialist, and by becoming a specialist, you'll end up not taking all clients. That's one of the hallmarks of being a specialist, right? So when you move to a new city, and you got kids, or you yourself just, need a new doctor's office, you move to a new city, you call the new doctor's office, the doctor's a specialist, right? What do you hear, especially in the US, you guys in the US, what do you hear when you call the new doctor's office when you move to that new city? Oh, we're sorry, Dr. So-and-so isn't taking new patients right now. Right? Not, what kind of insurance you got? Okay, cool. That's another sale. You come right on in. No. We're not taking new clients right now. Right? That's the difference between a specialist and a generalist. A generalist will take any money presented to them. A specialist will not. A specialist will only take so much, and they'll only take certain clients. Right? And that's predetermined. They determine what they need to operate. If they need $1 million a year to operate, they know exactly how many patients they need to make that $1 million a year, and they know exactly how many staff members they need to make sure that the customer service is up to snuff for that many patients. And when they hit that number, they stop. If they want more, they open another location. Right? Discipline. That discipline allows them to then be the best, and they're the best because they're not bogged down by bad clients. They're not bogged down by too many clients, too little staff. They're not bogged down by folks who don't know the practice or don't know what they're offering, constantly coming in the door and making them start over from zero. They're not bogged down by these things, and so the experience is immaculate. Right? It's incredible when you work with a specialist, and they charge a price premium because they know that the experience is incredible. They know that it's immaculate. They know that you're going to get exactly what you want. So that's a position that you want to get to, but you can't get to that position if all you're focused on is money. Right? If all you're focused on is money, you're not going to get there. You got to be focused on solutions. You got to be focused on value, or you won't make it to that realm. You might be a generalist. That's a hard life. Some people like it though. Some people like the chaos of it. There are people who like really get off in chaos, right? And like they're okay, having everything going crazy all the time. It makes them feel alive, gets their heart pumping. That's cool, man. There's no wrong answer. Whatever it is that floats your boat, dude. But for me, specialist all the way, right? The things that I do, no one does better, and it's because of the systems that I have in place, right? And I don't have to accept every client that comes through the door, and I don't accept every client that comes through the door. I only work with my perfect fit clients. Also puts me in a position where I can sit here on lives like this and just tell y'all everything, right? Because it doesn't matter to my base, because I'm always going to work with my perfect fit clients. My perfect fit clients, even if they know how to do it, will never want to do it themselves, right? That's a feature of the client that I target, right? So, you think of a person like, I don't know, Bill Gates. Bill Gates probably knows how an LLC works. Bill Gates probably knows how a C Corp works. He probably knows how to go to the Department of State and register a C Corp, register an LLC, probably knows how to go to the IRS website and get an EIN, right? Probably knows how to open up a business bank account. I'm assuming, but I feel like I'm safe in my assumption, right? He would never. He would always tell his legal team or another professional to go create another company for him, right? Doesn't mean that he doesn't have the ability to do it. Doesn't mean that he doesn't know how it works. It means that he has better things to do, right? That's the type of target client that comes through me. Not necessarily because of his like net worth, but based on how he would treat those situations, and that he would want them right, and that he would want somebody to be accountable for them. So he would understand the value in paying a professional to just get that done for him, right? So that's what happens when you're a specialist. You can write all the books, you can give it all away. It does not matter. It does not affect your client base in the slightest, at least not negatively. So you understand the difference now between a generalist and a specialist. All right. So like trying to think of a really solid kind of regular world application. Your generalist would be like Walmart, right? We go in there, there's a little bit of everything. Maybe it's cheap. Maybe there's not a whole lot of value, but you don't care because you're there for prices. Okay, fine. So that's your generalist. Your specialist might be, like a Michael Kors or like a Jean-Paul Gaultier, right? Where now the prices are different and there's not a little bit of everything, but what you're getting should be quality. The experience should be better. And you should be able to get something that's custom tailored to yourself, right? So those are the differences, and those are like the extreme differences. There's a whole, there's a whole world in between those two extremes. But just to make it make sense, for folks who have maybe never heard it before, that's the difference. And there's no right or wrong, right? Like Walmart's incredibly successful, from a monetary standpoint and from a business standpoint, right? So is Jean-Paul Gaultier, right? They're two very different situations. So there's not necessarily a right or wrong. It's just whatever resonates with you the best. For me, I couldn't imagine life as a generalist. That's just me. All right. So from there, when it rolls back into wealth building, you want to make sure that you have your plan, your personal wealth building plan, separated from your generational wealth plan. Right. Okay. Oh, sorry. You all can't all see the comments because I'm live on all three of you guys. Sorry about that. What if I don't have any kids? Oh, you don't need them, right? So we have a lot of clients who do their generational wealth plan with no kids, right? So your focus shouldn't even be kids per se. It should be legacy. Okay, so now some people are cool with like their legacy being like adopted, right? Like we have clients who themselves are orphans, and they typically set up legacies and create this thing with other orphans, right? Okay, cool, makes perfect sense. Some people, they'll go ahead and they'll set things up based on when they have kids, because they understand the sooner you start compounding, the better, right? So we actually had a young married couple that were amazing. They set up all their legacy stuff. I want to say she was 21 and he was 23. Real young couple, high school sweethearts. They're married. They didn't have kids yet, but they set everything up so that when they do have kids, the kids are covered. And they did a good job. Like, I was really impressed at their discipline, and where they wanted to be with that. So you can do that. Beyond that, you can always have your legacy plan turn into an endowment if you never have children. A lot of folks do that, right? So, for example, we had trying to remember what specialist he was. Well, there was a doctor, and he specialized in. It'll come to me, but he specialized in a certain disease, and so in his generational wealth plan, he set it up so that if anybody had a meaningful contribution to or cured this disease that he spent his life working on, there was already like a cash reward built into his generational wealth planning, right? So that cash reward stands as like an endowment within the trust, right? So the trust does what the trust does, and the trust is compounding and all of that. But there's a second pocket of money that just keeps building. And if any of his, descendants, cure rheumatoid arthritis, that's what it was. He was a rheumatologist, rheumatoid arthritis, or have some kind of input that leads to the cure of rheumatoid arthritis, they would get that entire like lump sum, right? Because in your trust, you don't want lump sums. You want some kind of breakdown where little pieces come out. Maybe they come out because of trigger events, right? So, for example, we have plenty of trusts that are set up with education triggers, right? So kid gets out of high school, wants to go to like a community college, which is something that typically generational wealth people teach. Like, do 2 years of community college, because why? Like, why would you go to Harvard for your first 2 years? It doesn't make sense when that money can be compounding in those 2 years instead of you dropping, six figures on your freshman year of college. So a lot of our wealthiest clients, it's mandated that their kids do 2 years of community college and get an associate's degree, and then go ahead and roll over into a bachelor program or a master's program, and then go to a university for 4 years after that too, and then go maybe post grad and all of that. But the triggers in the trust are like, all right, you go to community college, we cover it. That's all we cover is college, right? And then once you hit that associate degree, it triggers a distribution, right? A release of money from the trust, right? And it might be small, right? And then if you go for the next one, you go for the bachelor's, then it triggers like, okay, we're going to pay for that bachelor's program plus housing maybe, right? And then once you get that bachelor's, it triggers another tier of money being released from the trust, right? And then you get your master's, it triggers more money being released, and pay more because the master's costs more. And then you go for your doctorate, it triggers the maximum amount of money being released and pays more because that's more expensive, right? So there's a lot of the trusts have these trigger events, right? We've seen a lot where it's not collegiate based at all, where it's just education based. So they've created an equivalency, right? So in the trust document, and what's called the trust deed, it'll say, okay, cool, An associate's degree is the equivalent of an electrician's apprenticeship, right? Well, now the electrician has gone from apprentice to journeyman. Okay, well, that's associates to bachelor's, right? And then it might be, okay, well, now they've gone from journeyman to, master electrician or master plumber. Okay, well, that's bachelor's and master's degree, right? All right, well, now they've gone from a master plumber to a past master or an instructor. Okay, that's master's degree to PhD, right? And so they've had these tiers set off where you don't have to do a specific type of education. You just have to become educated, right? And so you can go to tech school and you can go to, college, or you can get an apprenticeship, and they've set that up, which with these levels are the equivalent of each other, and they trigger the same release from the trust. So that way, if you have a descendant who's just not a college person, which those people exist, they're brilliant. They might even be full on geniuses, but they're just not college people, right? They're tech people, or maybe they're not tech people. They're apprentice people, and so there's no penalty within the trust for somebody not following the same path as you, right? So that takes a bit of foresight. That's where your professional comes in, that they can break down, well, what about this? What about that? What if this happens? What if that happens? Things that you don't even know to think about, that they know about simply because of their experience, right? So again, that's the very formal kind of way that we do things, right? But you can get this started in any way you want. You can get this started with a high yields savings account. You can get this started with a custodial account, like a Schwab custodial account. I think Schwab custodial accounts are essentially free, right? So you could start with like something like that. The risk, what we typically do is we typically set up the base and foundation of the generational wealth in the least risky way possible. The better off your foundation is, the more risky you can be later with additional funds, right? So if we can get a foundation squared away where it's like, all right, we have a foundational amount of generational wealth that is compounding, and it's something safe, like a treasury bond, right? Or like, a AAA corporate bond, like a corporation that shouldn't be going anywhere, right? And you're getting a real good corporate bond rate, or a real good treasury rate, or whatever. That's the foundation, right? So that's your kind of locked in money. Then you can start looking at, risky investments and blue chips and this and that and the third. And then typically what'll happen is, in that trust controlling document, there'll be a breakdown of that. There'll be a breakdown of, like, this is the principal amount. The principal amount will never be reduced, right? And then from that principal amount, as dividends and coupon payments and interest payments and all that stuff come in, this is how we want that to be invested, right? So you can say, all right, I want 5% invested in physical real estate, 10% invested in REITs, another 20% invested in blue chip high risk stocks. I want 5% invested in gold. So you can break all of that down inside the trust document, and then your trustee will have no choice but to follow that. All right. We typically try to do it in ranges, so that when the market's bad, an appropriate reaction can happen, right? So sometimes the appropriate reaction is actually to get more, right? But sometimes it's like, all right, ramp back on that, ramp up on this. So we typically do ranges so that the trustee can say, okay, in good times we're doing 10% of this, but in bad times we're doing 5, right? It's a capital preservation technique, but that's maybe more advanced than it necessarily needs to be. That, if you got somebody looking over your stuff, you can get a little bit more advanced. You don't necessarily need it to be that advanced, because bad times are going to happen and good times are going to happen. That's just the way it is. You want to be able to shift the markets. So you want to have a clause in there that allows the trustee to shift the markets, right? So if one market dies, You want your trustee to be like, all right, we're getting out the U.S. stock market and we're getting into the Chinese market, or we're getting out of the Chinese, we're getting into the Nikkei, the Japan market, right? And so if you don't bake that flexibility in, it's not there. They cannot do what's best for you just because they know what's best for you based on their professionalism. They can only do what you wrote into the trust deed, right? They can only do what you wrote into the trust deed. We had a client that we always talk about. Sometimes when they're live and they raise their hand like it's me, they're talking about me. But we had a client that we were doing an offshore trust for generational wealth, and they had done domestic trusts to pay for their kids' college. So they did domestic trusts. Those domestic trusts owned LLCs, and the LLCs owned rental properties, right? And so the trustee of the domestic trust was collecting all the rents and all of that, and then investing it for the kids' college future. What they failed to do was write a clause into the trust about what happens when you don't pay your rent. So what ended up happening was somebody didn't pay their rent, and then when they were like, oh, okay, cool, evict them, the trustee was like, I can't, because there are no instructions in this trust document for evictions. So it's outside the scope of my authority as trustee to evict these people. And that spread. Like, once that tenant realized that they didn't have to pay, and essentially nothing could be done, they just did it. And it took like 3 years, because it took a couple years to get a judge to invalidate the trust. Because if it's an irrevocable trust, it's really hard to invalidate. So they had to have the judge invalidate the trust, and then that created a secondary issue, because as soon as the trust was invalidated, all these properties rushed back into their name. So from the IRS's point of view, you just earned ownership of $2 million worth of property. That's awesome. Let's have our taxes. But that's not what actually happened, right? So now you got this tax bill that you got to fight, because that's not what happens. That's what it looks like happens, but that's not what happened. And then you have to start the eviction process, right? So because they